The sound of a single wet thud against the hardwood floor of the nursery was what woke me at 3 in the morning. A noise so heavy and deliberate that it couldn't have been a settling house or a rogue draft. And when I sat up in the dark, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, the air in the room felt suddenly thick, charged with that static-like pressure you only notice when something is fundamentally out of place. I didn't reach for the light switch immediately, a primal instinct keeping me frozen under the duvet as I strained my ears, listening for the rhythmic breathing of my daughter in the crib just a few feet away. But the silence that answered me was absolute, heavy and suffocating in a way that made the hairs on my arms stand straight up. I finally forced myself to slide out of bed, my feet hitting the cold floor with a silence that felt unnaturally loud, and as I crept toward the crib, I noticed the first thing that didn't fit. My daughter's plush rabbit, the one she insisted on holding every single night, was lying face down in the exact center of the room, nowhere near the crib where she had been clutching it only hours before. I picked it up, expecting it to be cold, but the fabric was warm, almost feverish, and as I turned it over, the button eye seemed to catch a sliver of moonlight, reflecting a depth of darkness that felt impossible for a simple toy. But I pushed the feeling aside, telling myself I was just sleep-deprived, and leaned over the crib to check on her, only to find the sheets perfectly smooth, completely undisturbed, and empty. My breath hitched in my throat, a cold sweat breaking out across my forehead as I spun around, scanning the room, and that's when I saw it. The nursery door, which I knew I had latched shut before going to bed, was standing wide open, revealing the pitch-black hallway that seemed to stretch on far longer than it should have. I didn't call out her name. Something stopped me. A sudden, piercing realization that if I made noise, I would be inviting something to notice me. And as I stepped into the hallway, the floorboards didn't creak. They seemed to absorb my weight, pulling me toward the stairs with a subtle, magnetic drag. I descended slowly, the shadows in the corners of the ceiling seeming to peel away and follow my progress. And when I reached the kitchen, the back door was slightly ajar, the lock mechanism dangling loosely, clearly tampered with. Yet there were no muddy footprints, no signs of forced entry, just a series of small, perfectly circular depressions in the dust on the floor, leading from the door to the middle of the kitchen table. They looked like the points of a cane, or perhaps a finger, spaced out in a way that suggested someone had been standing there, balanced on one point, waiting for me to come downstairs. I backed away, my hands shaking so violently I had to grip the counter to keep from collapsing, and that was when I noticed the kitchen clock. It had stopped, its hands frozen at exactly 3:14, the same time that appeared on the display of the oven, the microwave, and even the smart screen on the wall. The consistency of the error was the first time I felt true, gut-wrenching terror, because it suggested that the house wasn't just experiencing a fluke, but that something had taken control of the environment, enforcing its own rules on the very fabric of my home. I crept back toward the living room, intending to grab my phone, but as I passed the large mirror in the hallway, I caught a glimpse of myself, or what I thought was myself, but the reflection wasn't moving in sync with me. It stood perfectly still, watching me with eyes that seemed to hold a different, more ancient intelligence. I stopped, and the reflection didn't. It slowly raised a hand and pressed it against the glass from the inside, its fingers splayed, and I noticed then that the skin on its hand was slightly translucent, revealing a network of veins that pulsed in the same rhythm as the house's plumbing, a slow, deep thrumming that I hadn't realized was vibrating through the floorboards the entire time. I turned and ran, not toward the front door, but toward the basement, the only place I felt I could hide, the stairs groaning under my feet as if protesting my intrusion, and as I slammed the basement door and locked it, the silence returned, heavier than before. I sat in the dark, listening to the house settle, waiting for the sun to rise, but the hours didn't pass. The shadows in the basement corners didn't shift with the coming dawn, and I eventually realized that the light under the door was not from the sun, but a dull, gray luminescence that never changed, never flickered, and never faded. I found a notebook on the workbench, its pages covered in a delicate, spidery handwriting that I didn't recognize, describing the house's layout with terrifying accuracy, noting every time I had walked through a room and in which direction, as if I were a character in a script being written in real time. The final entry was dated for today, but the time was blank, leaving a space for me to fill in, and as I stared at it, the pen resting on the page began to move on its own, scratching out a sequence of numbers that I knew deep down were the coordinates for the center of the room I had just left. I haven't left this basement in what feels like days, though the clock on the wall remains frozen, and every time I try to climb the stairs, I find myself back at the bottom, facing the same dark, unfinished space, with the feeling that the house is slowly rearranging itself around me, closing off exits, turning hallways into loops, and feeding on the confusion that grows in me like a physical weight. I keep hearing my daughter's voice, not from upstairs, but from behind the walls. A soft, muffled sound that repeats the same 3 words over and over, and every time I press my ear to the wood to hear better, the voice stops, and the wall feels warm to the touch, pulsating with that same strange, rhythmic life. I've started leaving notes of my own on the back of the ones I found, documenting the shifts in the walls, the way the furniture migrates when I blink, and the fact that the reflection in the mirror is now standing in the corner of the basement, just out of my peripheral vision, waiting for me to look at it directly. I know that if I do, I will see not my own face, but the space where my face used to be, and I realize now that this isn't a haunting in the way I understood it. It's a systematic replacement, a slow integration of my consciousness into the structure of this place, where I am becoming part of the foundation, one heartbeat at a time. The house isn't haunted, the house is hungry, and I have become the latest ingredient, the only thing keeping the lights from going out, though I know that eventually the cycle will require someone else to wander in, to find the door unlocked, and to hear that first heavy thud in the nursery that marks the beginning of the end for them, just as it did for me. I sit here in the dim, unshifting gray, waiting for the next sound, knowing that it won't be a knock or a footstep or a voice, but the sound of the house breathing, expanding, and pulling me deeper into the architecture of my own disappearance, where the only thing left of who I was is the memory of a rabbit on the floor and the realization that the door I locked was never really keeping anything out, but keeping me in. There is a shift in the air now, a subtle change in the pressure, and I can hear the floorboards above me rearranging themselves, the walls sliding silently into new positions to accommodate a new guest. And I understand that my time as an observer is ending and my time as part of the house is beginning. And there is nothing I can do but wait for the silence to finally take me, to let me become the echo that someone else will hear in the middle of the night, long after I am gone, a sound that will draw them into the nursery to find a toy on the floor and a door left wide open, and the cycle, perfect and patient, will begin again, as it always has, and as it always will until the house is full, or perhaps until it has nothing left to consume. I watch the mirror from the corner of my eye, and the figure is closer now, leaning in, its features beginning to blur into mine, and I realize the face I have been trying to protect, the identity I have been clutching onto, is already gone, replaced by the blank, expectant mask of the void that has been waiting for me in the dark all along. And as the basement stairs finally begin to dissolve into the wall, I close my eyes and listen to the house start to whisper my name, not as a person, but as a part of the woodwork, a part of the history, a part of the architecture of this endless, quiet, and absolutely certain trap